Okay, we can hear you, I believe.
All right. Well, it's good to be with all of you guys this morning and gals, I assume. And I actually grew up not far from where you guys are meeting, in southwestern Michigan in a little town called Vicksburg on Indian Lake. And so I love coming and visiting in the summer. But obviously we're in Arizona now. We've been here for 30 years. I do once in a while smuggle, known to smuggle map turtles. Grandkids can experience a little bit of Michigan. But yeah, it's let me see if I could switch to my different internet connection here.
I'm gonna flip this around.
Right,
So
can you hear me still? All right. Oh, I can see you guys. Great. Wow, what a great group. I was thinking, Jim told me that you guys were all Amish.
Mennonite.
Mennonite, okay. No, it's really good to be with you. But yeah, we've been in Arizona for about 30 years now. And so this seems like home, but again, we visit Michigan quite frequently. And I began to learn about the DMM approach probably around 2016. I mean, Jim and Vicky and myself really began to dive in deep during that time. We took trips to City Team, and we were just like wanted to learn as much as we could. And right off the bat, I was thinking, I mean, we see these movements happening in Africa and other places, and we got an opportunity to see them firsthand. But the first thought I had was, why not here? And in fact, oftentimes I remember sitting down with Dave Hunt, who was really a part of launching many of the movements in East Africa. And he lived here in Gilbert, Arizona for a period of time. And we were like, we don't even need to call this DMM because it's not a program. It's really, this is what biblical Christianity looks like, right? I mean, these habits that we're doing and strategies are really what it means to be a believer. And so I really dove in deep and really began to do a lot of work here in Arizona, in Phoenix in particular, of just trying to train people, equip people. But I would have to say that the biggest breakthroughs happen through prayer. And one of the tools that I used a lot was the 1002 prayer, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. But when you're in an area, like I was the very first person in Arizona that I knew that was using the DMM approach. There was one other person, but that person, left the area. But I remember the 1002 prayer was critical to pray for laborers. And I would have to say that, since those early days, we probably have a constituency of about 100 people that are practicing the DMM approach here. And I say that's because of prayer. Now, when we're talking about prayer, I oftentimes like to use the imagery of like the modern military. And I assumed this role. It's kind of funny. I was with Jim and I believe Vicky in Kansas City, and we were trying to figure out different roles that each person would play. And I remember Roy Moran, who is the North America director for New Generations, looked at me and he goes, "Dave, how would you like to really champion prayer?" And my initial thought was, I'm more that guy that wants to be on the field, doing the work. And so my initial thought was, man, no, I that's not me. But I will have to be honest with you that as I've really dove in deep and really began to embrace, what is it going to take to see movements happen, that my heart, passion, and drive has been prayer. I see it as the work, a big part of the work. And again, it's important to use imagery of the modern day military in order to illustrate some of the concepts that I wanted to share with you this morning. And we see that throughout scripture, right? Where Paul uses the weapons of our warfare. He says, put on the full armor of God. And so the imagery of warfare does a great job in illustrating, what we're talking about when we referring to spiritual warfare and prayer. But one of the things that we learn right off the bat is that in order to win the war on the ground, we first must win the air war. And most military experts agree that air superiority is the single most important factor in determining outcomes of modern military campaigns. And so that's where they put their energy to. I liken it in some ways to the battle of David and Goliath. I mean, David knew that if the battle came down to brute strength, that he most surely would lose. And so he employed aerospace weaponry, right? And so when it comes down to prayer, and seeing disciple-making movements emerge, we really need to take prayer seriously. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And, one scripture that comes to mind right off the bat was, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but it's against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And that's why, like, every person that you talk to that's seen movements overseas, they'll say that every, disciple-making movement is preceded by a prayer movement. I mean, that's almost become like a mantra, and I'm sure most of you guys have heard that. But another real quick illustration, I think, from the Bible that's helpful is in Exodus 17, where you have a war among the Israelites, the Amalekites taking place. And we see, Aaron and her going up there with Moses and Joshua fighting the battle on the ground. And if you remember the story, every time, that Moses was able to raise his hands up, which is a symbol, I believe, of intercession, they would have success on the ground. And so movement prayer is a lot like that. It's the war must be first won in the heavenlies. It must be won in the air before we see any like real impact on the ground. Now, what distinguishes movement prayer from other types of intercession? And I find that this is interesting. And the big thing is that movement prayer focuses on emergence of disciple-making movements. It focuses on seeing disciple-making movements come about that will result in transformation and kingdom expansion. I find that it's hard oftentimes for new people that are beginning to pray for disciple-making movements because they're so used to praying for like safety and comfort and blessings. Those are the main objectives of most people when you gather people together for prayer. They want to pray for those things, but oftentimes some of those things like safety and comfort and blessing can in some ways be a hindrance to what we want to see in disciple-making movements, because those are the struggles and the difficulties are oftentimes the things that actually bring people and open them up to God. But what we want to do is not just put lip service to prayer. I'm sure all of you guys have heard like, hey, we got to pray more. We don't want to just put lip service to it, but we actually want to begin to do it. And when we asked other movement leaders in other places of the world, why aren't we not seeing movements here, in the US? They rarely mention strategy. They never say, well, it's because you're not doing this or that. The thing that we hear most commonly is that there's a lack of prayer, here in North America. And so, again, we need to win the war in the air before we really see a lot of success happen on the ground. When kind of like thinking about what's needed for movement prayer, one example really came to mind, and I never even really heard of these individuals, but have any of you heard of combat control teams? I mean, I had heard of like Green Berets and Navy SEALs and Army Rangers, but really the baddest team in the military is this team called the combat control team. And they often call themselves the silent professionals because most people are not even aware of who they are. And they go behind the military lines before the battle even begins to start. They go behind enemy lines and prepare the way for the ground troops. And so they're inserted in and they begin to work. And one of the primary roles that they play is they identify and destroy enemy targets so that air superiority can be gained, but also so that when the troops on the ground come in, they'll have ultimate success. And they are as well trained as Green Berets, Navy SEALs, and they carry like weapons like rifles and grenade launchers. But their most powerful weapon is their radio. And with their radio, they're able to communicate with what they call eyes in the sky, those AWACS planes and satellites. And so there's constant communication with what's going on in the sky. They get information and intel from that, but they also use their radio to know what's going on the ground. And what we've determined by just things that we've learned from movement catalysts overseas is that one of the first and most important things to establish when you're beginning to target a particular area or a particular people group is the development of a movement prayer team. And so I want to just talk a lot about some of the similarities between a movement prayer team and a combat control team. First of all, a movement prayer team is generally oftentimes the first to be there. In fact, there are many times, and I'm sure some of you fit this category, you're like maybe the first people in your area that's focusing on seeing disciple-making movements emerge. I mean, God gave you this vision, this ominous, this huge vision. And so you're the first to be there. And the first role, and this happens oftentimes from what's often called is spiritual mapping, but you're identifying and destroying some of the enemy obstacles, some of the strongholds. You have a real keen knowledge of the target area that you're beginning to work on. And so you're focusing on what are the obstacles that are in the way that would stop a disciple-making movement from happening. And so you're the first on the ground. And oftentimes, I mean, we've seen this even when maybe focusing on a particular apartment complex, we'll pray for several months before we even engage. I don't think it's always that case, but oftentimes you gain a strategy and you gain insight on how to proceed by beginning with just concerted prayer. But the movement prayer team, generally what we've seen is they focus on a large geographic area or a people group, and they're very aware of what's going on, and they begin to do, warfare in regards to that. And so they're first to be there, but they're communicating with the sky, and they're listening to God through prayer and discernment. And we could see numerous illustrations, I think, in the Bible where Jesus got alone with the Father to pray. And I think many of those times he's just listening. He's getting insight. He goes away and spends a whole night in prayer before he chooses, the 12. And so we need to hear what to pray for before we even begin to pray. I'm going to say that again because it's really important. I think that we need to pray for what to pray for before we pray. And we discern that from spending time listening to the Father. And so the movement prayer team is usually the first to be there and to begin to do the work. They spend a lot of time communicating with the sky, with God, the Father. And then they also communicate with disciple makers that are on the ground. What we found in like East Africa with Isla is that every week when the movement prayer team gets together over Zoom or in person, is they have different teams give reports to them. Now, the initial report will have to do with like, the language and the location and the history and the religions of the people group that they're working on. And so they share this with the movement prayer team. But then the subsequent times when they give a report, and they may be on like kind of a rotating basis where there's maybe 5 teams and they each take a turn. The second time that they share and all the continuing times that they give reports, they share about obstacles, they talk about opportunities, they talk about the health of their team and the development of their team. And they talk about what are some of the strongholds that they're contending against. And so they do this. They spend a lot of time communicating with disciple makers on the ground so that the prayers can be more informed. And then that allows them to be much more strategic. And so they're communicating with the sky, they're communicating with disciple makers on the ground. And then they also are able to call in airdrops and airstrikes. What airdrops, I think, refer to is they understand what are the resources that are needed on the ground in order to see disciple-making movements emerge. And so they're praying for open hearts, they're praying for persons of peace, they're praying for more opportunities for spiritual conversations. And so they're hearing from God, they're hearing from other laborers on the ground, and they're praying for these airdrops, these needed resources. But they also, and I think this is profound, they also have the authority to call in airstrikes. I mean, in the combat controllers are given so much authority because they have all this intel that they have the power to determine where airstrikes, take place. They can call in, a dozen planes and say, hey, I want you to drop bombs, on this target, and I think we forget oftentimes the authority that we have been given by God to pray strategically and demolish strongholds and bind the work of the enemy. It's funny when I've talked with Shadonke and even like Harry Brown, who's, he's the director, the president over New Generations, they will talk regularly about breaking strongholds. And so I feel like we need to learn a lot more about what that is and how to do it. Because I think that if we don't really demolish these obstacles that are happening, over the target area that we're working, then it's going to really hamper and cause resistance to what we want to see happening on the ground. And then the final thing I think that a movement prayer team is they're able to coordinate, track, and mobilize the air power. They will meet generally once a week over Zoom for at least 30 to 40 minutes. And this is where they receive input from maybe a disciple-making team. It could be the first 10 minutes of a prayer call. And then they go to warfare. They begin to pray strategically for these needs during a weekly movement prayer, what we call movement prayer hubs. And we've begun to establish these movement prayer hubs in places across North America. And I don't know if Jim has shared with you or Vicky the movementprayer.org website. But we're really wanting to come alongside and help different groups, what we call movement prayer, people that want to be a part of a movement prayer team, establish these prayer hubs and these teams to begin to really focus on various target areas and people groups in North America. And so they begin to meet, over Zoom for movement prayer hubs, but they're also helping to unleash and promote like strategic prayer, maybe a half night of prayer, maybe different prayer walks within the target area. And so they're constantly coordinating and tracking and mobilizing prayer for that particular target area. Any questions? I know I'm just kind of like blah, 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 blah this morning, but, and you guys are probably ready for lunch, but any questions or what stood out to you so far?
David, you did some training here, right? You did some training in Chicago.
Yeah. Yep.
What did you do?
What did I do?
Yeah.
Or we basically, a lot of it was hands-on. In fact, if I was there, I would share a lot differently than what we're doing here. We would actually do some of the stuff, but we use several of the tools. One of them is, we love to use maps when we do prayer for target areas. And so we had maps. We had, I think, close to like about 60 people, and Hispanic people praying actually for Muslims in Chicago area. But we laid out maps and they would circle around these maps, spend time listening to God, and then write down what they felt like they're supposed to pray for on little sticky notes. And then they would pray for those areas. They would put the sticky note on the map and just pray for, whatever it was that God had commanded them to pray. I want to share with you too, real quick. When you're receiving reports as far as what's going on the ground with various teams, I feel like the O2 prayer tool is really, really helpful. And O2 stands for obstacles and opportunities. And so, if you're talking to a team person, you'll ask them, share with us, what are your opportunities right now? And they'll begin to just share, what their opportunities are, where they see God working. And then we ask them, what are your obstacles? And they'll share, boy, our team has been really dealing with a lot of sickness and we feel like we're under spiritual attack, or we feel like there's resistance in this particular, area that we're trying to target. And so what you do is you pray for more of the opportunities, and then you pray against the obstacles. And so oftentimes, if we write this out, we'll circle the opportunities as they're prayed for one by one, and then we'll cross out the obstacles. And so we use that a lot when praying for teams, praying for individuals, and it's been a helpful tool. So,
yeah, just call it out if you have a question. Just
yeah.
Yeah. Hi, David.
Hi, hello.
So that one thing that really touched me, everything is good, but starting to pray to identify what the enemy has, understanding that.
Yeah.
I have a question about that.
Okay.
I agree with that. The first thing is sometimes we are in the area we don't have full knowledge about when you try to reach them. So we may have to take time to identify the problems. That will take time.
Yes.
Or, so that means either we have to find somebody from there or we have to experience what the obstacles are as we go. Am I correct there?
Yes. Yeah. I think there's initial work and discovery, but there's a continual work and discovery. Sometimes it's helpful to get somebody from the outside to come in too, because what we've found that, the strongholds are oftentimes, people, they're attached to culture, and so many times people that are living within an area are not even aware of it because it becomes kind of just normal, the way they think and feel. When I come back to Grand Rapids, like Michigan, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but I feel a strong, like, religious spirit. very strong religious spirit, which we don't have that in Phoenix that much, but I feel that really heavy when I'm in Western Michigan, and I'm not sure everybody that's there really knows that exists. So sometimes it's helpful to get outside discernment.
Yeah, a couple more questions before we break up and talk about this in our groups.
Yeah.
So any insight, David, sorry. David, first time caller, long time listener.
Yeah.
This is Robert.
Hey, Robert.
Idiot.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna probably be there, Robert, and I knew you probably wanted to harass me, so I'm ready.
Yeah, that's my job. It's my job. Any insights from Harry and Shadonki about praying for strongholds and tearing down, that whole warfare part of it?
Yeah, I'm not enough. I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of people that say we need to pray against strongholds, but they don't really say this is how to do it. A friend of mine, Tom Marshall, and myself are writing a book right now on movement prayer. And one of the chapters that we're really focusing in on is how do you pray for strongholds? How do you identify them? And then how do you pray against them and remove them? And so that's one of the chapters of the book. And I'll be honest with you that's one of the questions I have is, you hear about it but the first question you have is, okay, yes, but how? Right. And so I hope to share a lot more about that in the future. I think it'd be kind of hard for me to share it in just a short time that we have here. But I would say one thing it's multifaceted. We think of it as just one way of dealing with strongholds, but it's multifaceted.
So essentially you're saying buy your book?
No, it'll probably be given away. It'll probably be given away. I'm sure it'll be an ebook, hopefully it'll be helpful, but I've probably read in the last couple months, probably about 7 books on spiritual warfare, just to get to really grasp, what's entailed to break down spiritual strongholds.
And David, can I comment on that? So often in the Old Testament in particular, before there's a revival, Nehemiah, Daniel, Moses, they confess the sins of that culture.
Yep.
And you see it, we've been sinful, our forefathers have been sinful, and we've disregarded. Is that part of it? Because I just see that over and over again.
That would be one of the, things that's needed is confession and repentance. I mean, that's one of many components of it. I mean, I think fasting too, fasting would be a way. One of the insights I thought was really cool is, I often thought of Jesus going in the wilderness was, he goes in the wilderness, he's weak, he's out there just suffering, and then, why would Satan want to attack him when he's at his weakest? But I have come to realize that Jesus was at his strongest when he was in the wilderness. That's when he was the most powerful, because he had been praying and fasting. And so, I just think of fasting as being really key to breaking strongholds too.
David, can I ask one more? Sorry.
Yeah. So this is the last one, and then I want to give you time in your group, so go ahead.
So from what you said, I understand some strongholds are cultural, which I agree, because we don't know, we are not aware, but we are in it, some of the strongholds. But from the history of movements, are there some common strongholds that we can be aware of? The enemy is doing the same thing in many places. Is there something?
I think, one is distractions, is a key one. I was just thinking the other day, like when the Israelites went out to worship, I mean, they were just wanting to go and worship at first. And what did the enemy do? He increased their work. He took away the straw and made it more difficult for them. And I find that the biggest thing, like when we begin to do disciple making movements, it seems like the enemy really causes distractions. He adds more complexity to our lives. And that's one of the tactics that I see the enemy doing to get us off track, to keep us not focused on what's really most important.
Okay, so I want to give people time to apply this, but thanks so much. David, like he said, he's got an amazing website with, I don't know, he has all kinds of practical tools on there that tell you like just really creative, engaging ways, creative ways to pray. And he's got a team working on that. It's not just him. And there's also Wednesday morning prayer. If you want to, he's got a Zoom prayer meeting that you can join, but then the goal is to get many of these. And are there 9 or prayer hubs going?
Close to 15 right now.
Wow.
Some of them are focused. Jim, if I can just say one more last word.
Yeah, please.
One of my hopes is that, if you are working in a target area, that you will establish, a movement prayer team and a prayer hub. I mean, I guess that's what I would love to see, come out of this, is that you get that piece established.
And you were saying sometimes that comes out of the training. Sometimes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, like we did a training in Philadelphia, and now they're, doing
the habit. You did the habits training.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then people who are catching the vision are beginning with prayer.
Yep,
Is that it?
definitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Bless you guys.
Thanks, David.
Thanks.
Thank you.